I'm Debbie. Thank you for joining me today. So today we're going to be painting this golden sunset design. And this one is easy, just like all of my tutorials. It's really basic. I'm going to walk you through every step. I keep it really simple with having a limited number of brushes and a limited number of colors. So we're only needing 3 brushes for this one. If you decide you want to paint on a larger canvas, you can maybe introduce one larger brush, like a 1-inch flat brush, and that's just for getting the basic background colors covered faster. But really you just need these 3 brushes. If you have an older beat up brush, that can be kind of helpful too. So when we're blending, not wasting or not ruining your good brush is a good idea. So we'll have that, and then for the colors, as with all my tutorials, we're keeping it really basic with just the 3 primary colors plus white. So we're using magenta, yellow, and blue. And the reason I do this is to keep it really simple so you can learn how to mix every color on the planet. All you need is these 3 plus white, and sometimes we'll use black, but we're not going to use that today. So I hope you will grab your supplies and join me, and we're going to have some fun. Cheers. I just spilled. Oh, why am I such a klutz? We're going to start off making a navy blue. So you're going to take a scoop of the blue, a little bit of magenta, and a tiny bit of yellow to start. Mix those together. By mixing all 3 of these colors, you're going to get a really dark blue shade. Now you want to draw a line where the water line is going to be. So you want to go down a little bit below the halfway mark. And you're just going to take that. If you need to use some painter's tape, the blue painter's tape, to get a nice straight line, you can. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, but make it as straight and level as you possibly can. And then you're just going to fill that in, go down about halfway, and you can curve that bottom edge just a little bit. That's going to be the edge of the water. So next we're going to mix a light blue sky color. So take a big scoop of white and a tiny bit of blue, and just a tiny bit of magenta, because we want it to be warmed up just a little bit. You're going to paint this color on about the top half of the sky. For the next portion of the sky, we're going to mix a warm golden color. Take a big scoop of yellow, a little bit of magenta, and a big scoop of white. And we will blend this right below the blue. Don't worry about blending the blue and yellow together too much, because we're going to be painting clouds right along that line where the blue and yellow meet. So next you want to add some magenta to your yellow mix so we get a nice orange shade, and you're going to paint that last section of white. Just be really careful when you're getting up to the water line. You want to make sure that your brush doesn't swipe that navy blue, because if you do and you start swiping it into blending it into the sky, it's going to get really muddy. So just be real careful with that. If you do happen to get a little bit of that blue on your brush, just clean your brush off really well, dry it off, and continue adding the orange. As you get right up to the edge of the yellow and you want to get a really smooth blend between the yellow and the orange, just keep dragging your brush back and forth in long brush strokes from left to right. If you use the wider part of the brush, that'll blend it nicer. You could even take a little bit of the yellow, pure yellow, and just drag it right on top of where the orange and yellow meet and blend it back and forth. Then you're going to take that same orange and bring it down on the bottom portion of the canvas, right below the water line. Again, try not to smear it into the dark blue. And you're going to add this. Don't go all the way down to the very bottom edge. This is going to be the reflection of the sky on the part of the sand where the water is just lightly coming over the sand. And so you'll see the reflection showing on that glossy part of the sand. Then you're going to take a little bit of the yellow, mix that into the left and right sides of the orange. Now we're going to mix our cloud color. So you're going to take some magenta, some blue, and a little bit of white. We're making sort of a purpley gray shade. So we're also going to add a touch of yellow, and what the yellow is going to do is gray it up a bit, and it's going to mute it down so it's not so vibrant. And now we're just going to smudge this color onto the canvas, right where the blue and the yellow sky meet. So you don't want to have a ton of paint on your brush, you just want a little bit on there. Wipe most of your paint off on your palette, and then you're just going to smear and smudge until you get all that paint rubbed off of your brush. I'm going to attach a link to a cloud tutorial that I did if you're not familiar with how to do clouds. This is a quick video on how to do really simple clouds. If you want to watch that, that might help you as well. Now, as I'm painting these clouds, I'm using the flat edge of the brush to get a little bit more of a random cloud shape, so they're not so perfect. You never want them to look like puffy cartoon clouds. So just hold the edge of the brush almost flat to the canvas, and that'll really help your clouds. And then I'm just adding quite a few of these. I'm going to attach a photo here of the final design so you can kind of see where I place the clouds. But by using just the side edge of the brush, you can get some skinnier, smaller ones. As the clouds are lower on the sky there, as they get closer towards the water, you want them to look like they're further in the distance. So those will definitely be smaller than the larger ones on top. And a lot of times you can just do a little side streak just to imply some clouds are sort of hanging out in the distance and not so big and puffy as you get lower. Just want a tiny bit of paint on your brush. You want to wipe most of it off on your canvas, and it's almost a dry brush technique, and you're just kind of smudging and smearing and blending it right on top of the blue sky and around those clouds there. And just, we don't want to cover the whole area of blue, but this is just sort of a warm glow that's going to appear up and behind the clouds. Now you're going to take just the very tip of your brush and we're going to add that light color that we mixed right along the top edges of the clouds. So you're not going to do this on all of them, you're going to do them on this large cloud that's right above the yellow part of the sky, and then a little bit on some of the ones that are right above and below it. And this is the glow that's coming out from behind the sun. And we're going to go back in later and brighten it up even more, but this will be the first layer. And I added a little bit more white to this mix to make it just a touch brighter, and went back over some of those edges of the clouds. Next, you're going to take your number 8 filbert, and we're going to do a mix of some yellow and a little bit of white. And we're just going to blend in a few areas just to give another layer of color. We're going to add a little extra yellow just below these clouds here to make it look as if that yellow from above is carrying down into it and giving a little glow into the sky right below those clouds there. Now we want to pump up the glow of where the actual sun is coming from. So we're going to take a big scoop of white and a tiny bit of yellow, and we're just going to add a little smudge of this light white-yellow mix right in that spot where the sun is hiding behind the clouds there. And then by having just a little bit of paint on your brush, not much at all, you're going to wipe off the extra. You just want to blend and fade it into the background. So you're just kind of feathering it into the background, but keeping the brightest part right at the base of the clouds there where it dips down. Now we're going to add the reflection of the sunlight hitting down on that bottom orange base part. So if you take your brush, you're just going to do little swipes just directly below where the white of the sun is, and just adding streaks back and forth to give it sort of a blended glowing effect. And then we'll go back in with a little bit of white and do the same thing right on top of that. And we'll add a little bit of this yellow streaking on the left and right sides as well. Keeping the main brightest highlight right in the center where the sun is coming right down below it though. Next we're going to take some of that cloud color, so hopefully some of that's still wet on your palette. If not, just mix some more of that cloud shade. And we're going to add this to the very bottom edge of the canvas. And this is the sand. It's in shadow since it's around sunset, so it won't be a bright tan sand color. It's going to be same shade as the clouds. And it's okay if a little bit of that orange or yellow shines through it. That just adds a nice glow to it and gives it a cool effect. Now we're going to add some layers and highlights in the water. So if you have some of your navy that is still wet, that's perfect. You're going to take a little bit of white and a little bit of that navy color, and you're just going to we're using the 5/8 angular brush. And if you hold your brush sideways and just using the very tip of the brush to get really fine, skinny little lines. We're just going to add streaks, lots and lots of streaks, and water it down just a touch so it'll be a little smoother and easier to paint on there. Also, if it's thinned out with water, it's going to dry to a nice faint color. It won't be too bright. And you just want to make sure you're doing horizontal streaks. They can have a slight wiggle or wave to them, but you don't want them to be really strong angles because it'll look like the waves are huge and crazy, and we're trying to keep this looking more in the distance. So keeping these lines a little bit flatter, the waves a little bit flatter, is going to really help. Then we're going to mix a little more of a blue shade, tiny bit of blue, tiny bit of magenta, and a bunch of white. So this is going to be sort of a periwinkle, a little bit more on the bluish side. And we're going to do the same thing. This is just adding another layer and dimension of color. Same technique, just going to add a bunch of these streaks into the water as well. I felt like I needed a little bit more blue and white mixed into that, so they were just a little more vibrant, so it's more obvious it's a slightly different shade than that first color. You don't want it to be a huge difference, but you just want to see a little bit of variation. So just more streaks, more fine, thin streaks. It's okay if they get a little bit thicker and thinner here and there, but overall you want them to be fairly skinny because these are in the distance, so they should be pretty small. So now you want to mix a white shade with just a touch of that blue color. So it's going to be a lot whiter. And we're going to add little swirly edges. This is going to be like the white caps of the waves. So these can have a slight curve to them. Just don't make them too huge and archy. And these can be a little bit thicker and thinner. Keep them really tiny though. And you don't want to do a ton of these. You're going to do just a few of these, and then along the very edge of the water you're going to do a little bit of this white as well. Now we're going to take a little bit of that navy with some white in it, and we're going to add some streaks right on top of that orange section. So these are actually going to be edges of the water that it'll make sense in the end. This is all still part of the water edge, but this is that thin layer that crashes up onto the beach, and the reflection's really strong on it because it's pretty much a flat, wet surface of the sand. So we're going to add some streaks of the blue to start with, and then we'll add a little bit more of the lighter mixture, and you're just going to do it right on top of that dark blue, and then we'll add a teeny bit of white right onto these as well. Now you're going to take your teeny tiny number 2 round brush, and we're going to add, with the navy blue color, just little pebbles and rocks and twigs into the thin part of the sand where the thin water is, and then also on the front edges of the sand. Now you definitely want to keep the ones that are out there on the water much smaller than the ones that will be in the foreground, because those are further back, and this is also going to help give it perspective. Now you're going to take your number 8 filbert brush, and you want this nice and soft and dry because we're going to be doing some blending. So if you have kind of a beat up brush, that's even better. So we're going to take a little bit of that orangey color, and we're just going to blend a teeny bit. You want barely any paint on your brush. You're just going to blend a little bit into the bottom edges of your clouds. And this is going to create a warm glow only on the bottom edge because you want that sunlight kind of reflecting back up into the cloud. So you're not going to do this on all of the clouds, but just the ones that are right around the edges of the sun. Sometimes it also helps to add just a teeny bit of water if you're finding that it's not blending well for you. Not much, just a teeny tiny bit, and again, barely any paint on your brush. You want this to be really subtle, just creating a little bit of a warm glow. Now you can add just a little bit more of the yellow in that mix to give it another layer. And again, you just want barely any paint on your brush because you want it to be very subtle. And you're just blending it into the bottom edge, and then you're going to fade it up towards the top of the cloud, but keeping a little bit of that purple showing at the top. Then we're going to take a little bit of that purple cloud mix that we did, and you could even add just a little bit more blue into it and go a little bit lighter. So it's going to be a more purple shade than that gray that we originally had. And again, just a teeny bit of this paint on your brush is going to work better for you rather than having a big thick glob of it. So just add a little bit of paint on your brush and wipe most of it off. And then you're going to start at the top of the cloud and just feathering it into that warm mix that you did. So you just want a little bit of this added to the top edges of your clouds. And by having this color a little bit different than the original grayish cloud color and just putting little bits here and there and fading it into it and blending it into it, it's just giving more dimension and layers to your clouds so they're not just a big flat gray shape. Then we're going to take some of the same color, just a teeny bit on your brush, and you're just going to blend a little bit here and there into the sand. So it looks as if the sky is reflecting down onto the sand. And you don't want to cover the whole area, just little bits here and there. Now we're going to take our 5/8 angled brush and we're going to make a light yellow mix. So a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white. And again, we're just going to have a teeny bit of paint on our brush, so you want to wipe most of it off. If it's too bright, you can always take a teeny bit of that orange mix and blend it into it. But we're just dragging it right on top of the light areas of the sky up there, just to give it an extra layer, an extra dimension, so it's not just one flat color. Now we're going to take our number 8 filbert brush again, and we're going to add a little bit of white to the area where the sun is. So just a little tiny bit of paint on your brush. Teeny bit. I keep saying teeny. I mean it. Take a teeny bit, and you're just going to blend it right into the sky. And then just fade it out as it gets up into that yellow area, but you want the main part right below where the dip is in the cloud, you want that to be brighter white. And then you can take a little bit of yellow and blend that into it, the pure yellow, right above that area. Okay, now we're going to add those rays of sunlight coming right out of that white portion of the sun there. Make sure your background is completely dry for this part because you don't want to smear anything you have going on behind it. And you're going to water down your brush a little bit. We're going to have white with just a little bit of yellow mixed in. And then your brush, you want it to be very cleaned off and not too wet so it's drippy, but just a little bit wet. And then you're going to drag these streaks of the sun coming right out from that white portion. And it's going to be fairly watered down, and you want it to be watered down because when it dries, it's going to fade a little bit. So it won't stay this bright, but it's better to start off with a little extra water in it. And I mean, again, not as much to where it's going to drip. You want just your brush a little bit wet. And then once it dries, you'll see it's going to fade, and we'll probably go back in later and brighten that up a little bit. You're also going to take a little bit of this white and yellow and drag a little bit down into the reflection of the water down on the sand, just to brighten that up a little bit if it needs it. Yours might already be brighter, mine kind of faded out, so I'm just brightening that up a little bit as well. So we're going to take a little bit of that pure yellow and just really brighten up that area right where the sun is. And then we're also going to take a teeny bit more white and pump up right where the sun's peeking out from behind the cloud. You can also see those rays of sunlight are almost completely gone because once they dried, they just disappeared right into the background, but we'll pump those up later as well. Now let's take our tiny little number 2 round brush, and we're going to put a little bit of white and yellow on the brush, and we're just going to brighten up all those edges like we did way earlier on, but this is going to be a much brighter shade. And we're just going to do a little bit right along the edges of all of those clouds that are right near the sun. And this is going to make them really pop and appear that there's this vibrant, bright sun glowing out from behind them. Now, if you want to add a bird to your landscape, shift it a little bit from the center. So I'm doing mine a little bit left to center. You never want to have any focal point right directly in the center. It just kind of looks a little bit off. So you always want to give it a little more interest and go a little bit to the side. So I'm just doing a really simple little bird. Start with like a curved V. Make sure the wing's a little bit thicker at the base. And then you're just going to add a little body. And it's just a little swipe. Don't get too detailed. Don't add a beak and get all fancy because it's pretty tiny. So you don't really need to get that detailed with it. Just make sure your small, tiny brush is nice and sharp and pointy. And then I went ahead and went in and added a little bit more of a light kind of periwinkle color to the clouds because I felt like they needed just a little more dimension. So you could do that as well if your clouds are looking a little bit flat. Now you can go through and add little touches here and there if you feel like you need to. I wanted to pump up the white highlights down on the shoreline, the reflection of the sun. And then I added just a little more white to my actual sun. And I wanted to pump up my rays a little bit. So I used my 5/8 angular brush. Again, I watered it down quite a bit, made my paint very thin, and then just very lightly. Make sure your background is really dry before you do this so you don't end up smearing anything behind it. And then I just brightened up all those rays a little bit. And then you'll see how yours looks. If it dried pretty invisible, then you might want to go back in and do the same thing. And that is pretty much it. Thank you so much for painting with me. I hope you had a good time, and please send me pics. Let me know what other kind of things were you going. Let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like to learn how to paint, and we'll try to make that happen. If you haven't already, please subscribe and like this video. Once you subscribe, make sure to hit that little bell that's going to pop up, and that will notify you every time I upload a new video. All right, we'll see you next time.